30,000 people. Not curious. Not excited. Hostile. They didn't gather to discover a new band. They gathered to watch one fail loudly, publicly, and without mercy. Bottles were already in the air before Queen had touched a single instrument. Insults rolled across the field like waves. The crowd wasn't waiting for music. They were waiting for humiliation. February 1974, an open field in Australia. Heat, alcohol, anger, and 30,000 voices united by one idea. This British band does not belong here. Backstage, Freddie Mercury stood still, listening. Every cheer outside was fake. Every roar was loaded with threat. He could hear it in the pitch of the crowd. This wasn't normal booing. This was rejection with teeth. Queen had crossed half the world believing this night could launch their career internationally. Instead, they had walked into something closer to an ambush. Freddie had no illusion about what was happening. This wasn't a tough crowd. This wasn't a bad night. This was a verdict waiting to be delivered. 30,000 people wanted Queen gone. Not later, not politely, now. And as Freddie stepped toward the stage, microphone in hand, one truth settled in his chest with terrifying clarity. If this went wrong, it wouldn't just be embarrassing. It could end everything before it ever truly began. But that wasn't the most dangerous part. Before we continue, if you love the stories of Freddie Mercury and Queen and want to help keep his legacy alive, subscribe to this channel, like, and share. On paper, the invitation looked like a miracle. A major Australian festival, a massive crowd, top billing. For a band that hadn't yet conquered America, this felt like a shortcut to global recognition. What Queen didn't see was the resentment forming beneath the surface. To Australian musicians, Queen were outsiders who hadn't paid their dues locally. To local crews, they were arrogant foreigners arriving with their own equipment and expectations. To parts of the press, they were pretentious, theatrical, and undeserving of the spotlight. By the time Queen landed in Australia, the narrative was already set. Why should an unknown British band headline a festival that local acts had worked years to earn? Freddie sensed the tension immediately. Conversation stopped when he walked past. Smiles felt forced. Even small interactions carried an edge. Brian May, already unwell, tried to stay focused. Roger Taylor remained optimistic. John Deacon said very little, but his silence spoke loudly. This wasn't excitement. It was resentment waiting for permission. Queen believed that once they played, everything would change. That music would cut through the hostility. They were wrong. Because this crowd wasn't judging sound, they were defending territory. And Queen had stepped directly into it. The night before Queen's performance, the warning became impossible to ignore. Their lighting rig shipped from England at enormous cost was found damaged. Several cables had been cut clean through. The explanation was vague, accidental, convenient. Freddie didn't believe it for a second. Someone wanted them exposed. On the day of the festival, the heat intensified everything. Alcohol flowed freely, tempers shortened. By late afternoon, the crowd was no longer a collection of individuals. It was a single mood. Then came the final push. Minutes before Queen were due to perform, the festival DJ took the microphone. Instead of introducing the band, he gave the crowd permission. Permission to boo, permission to mock, permission to show the British band exactly how unwelcome they were. 30,000 people responded instantly. When Queen finally walked toward the stage, the noise hit them like a physical force. Booing erupted before Freddie reached the microphone. Bottles arced through the air. Obscene gestures filled the field. This wasn't resistance. It was coordinated rejection. Freddie stood at the front of the stage and looked out at 30,000 faces that wanted him smaller, quieter, erased. Most artists break later. Some break immediately. Freddie didn't break at all. But something inside him shifted. Because now he understood the truth. This wasn't about music anymore. It was about survival. Queen launched into their opening song one of their own. Complex, layered, carefully written. It was exactly the wrong choice. The crowd didn't listen. They attacked. Booing grew louder. Bottles landed closer to the stage. The heat, the noise, the humiliation pressed in from every direction. Brian May could barely hear his guitar. His illness made every movement heavier. Roger Taylor fought to keep time against the chaos. John Deacon locked in, saying nothing, absorbing everything. Freddie sang. But for the first time that night, his voice wasn't controlling the room. The crowd was 15 minutes passed like an eternity. To anyone watching, it looked inevitable. Queen was dying on that stage, not dramatically, not heroically, publicly. This is where most bands fall apart, where panic sets in, where mistakes multiply, where someone storms off or lashes out. Freddie Mercury did something else. He stopped. Mid-performance, he turned away from the crowd and looked directly at his bandmates. No shouting, no gestures, just a look. The most dangerous silence of the night. In that silence, Freddie made a decision that would either save them or finish them forever. This was the moment. And whatever he was about to do, no one in that crowd or on that stage had seen it coming. The more Queen pushed forward with their original material, the worse it became. Their music wasn't bad. It was simply wrong for that moment. The intricate arrangements, the theatrical shifts, the progressive structures, everything that made Queen unique only widened the gap between the band and the crowd. To 30,000 angry Australians, it sounded pretentious, foreign, disconnected. The booing intensified. More bottles flew. Some shattered near the monitors. The insults grew louder, more personal, more vicious. This wasn't about sound quality anymore. It was about dominance. Brian May later admitted those minutes felt endless. His body was already fighting illness, and now his focus was being torn apart by the chaos in front of him. Roger Taylor tried to keep the tempo aggressive, hoping volume might cut through hostility. John Deacon stayed rooted, anchoring the band while everything around them threatened to collapse. And Freddie listened. He felt the rhythm of the crowd, not musically, but emotionally. He understood they weren't rejecting Queen because they hated music. They hated what Queen represented in that moment. Outsiders, invaders, pretenders to a stage they believed belonged to someone else. That realization changed everything. Freddie knew continuing like this would destroy them, not slowly, immediately. So he did something that terrified the band more than the crowd ever could. He stopped the show and turned his back on 30,000 enemies. Freddie walked toward his bandmates as the noise surged behind him. Booing, whistles, shouts. For a brief second, it looked like surrender. Brian May felt it in his chest, that cold certainty performers dread. The sense that the night had slipped beyond control. Roger Taylor glanced up, unsure whether to keep playing or stop. John Deacon didn't move at all. Then Freddie spoke. 2 words. Low, calm, almost casual. Plan B. It wasn't a speech. It wasn't dramatic, but it landed like an explosion. Plan B was something they had discussed only half seriously, a theoretical escape for a disaster scenario no one ever believed they'd face. It meant abandoning their songs, abandoning their identity, abandoning the very thing they were trying to promote. To most bands, that would have felt like defeat. To Freddie Mercury, it was control. Because Plan B wasn't about pleasing the crowd. It was about disarming them. Freddie knew something instinctively. Hostile crowds don't want complexity. They want familiarity. They want to feel included. They want to recognize themselves in the music. And if Queen could stop being foreign for just a few minutes, everything might change. Freddie turned back toward the stage edge. The crowd expected collapse. Instead, they were about to witness something far more dangerous. Without warning, Queen abandoned their set. No explanation. No apology. Freddie stepped forward and launched into a song everyone there knew, not a Queen track, but a piece of shared history. Raw, simple, unmistakable. The effect was immediate. The booing didn't stop because people suddenly loved Queen. It stopped because they were confused. 30,000 people hesitated just long enough for recognition to kick in. Heads turned. Feet slowed. Bottles stopped flying. This wasn't British prog rock anymore. This was their music. Freddie leaned into it completely. He moved differently, now looser, playful, fearless. He prowled the stage like a man who belonged there, channeling the spirit of early rock and roll icons the crowd had grown up with. Brian May felt the shift instantly. Despite the illness draining him, adrenaline took over. Roger Taylor attacked the drums with renewed aggression. John Deacon locked in, grounding everything with relentless precision. The transformation spread outward like a ripple. Hostility softened into curiosity. Curiosity turned into movement. Movement turned into participation. Within minutes, the same crowd that had tried to bury Queen was nodding along. Some were smiling. Freddie Mercury hadn't begged for approval. He had taken it by meeting the crowd where they were and pulling them somewhere else entirely. And for the first time that night, Queen wasn't fighting 30,000 people. They were leading them. The change didn't happen all at once. That's what made it real. At first, only a few people near the front stopped booing, then a few more further back. The noise didn't disappear, it thinned, like a storm losing strength. Freddie noticed immediately. He adjusted his movements, stretched moments that worked, cut anything that didn't. He smiled when recognition spread across faces. He leaned into the familiar rhythms, letting the crowd feel ownership instead of resistance. 30,000 people weren't cheering yet, but they were listening. That was the turning point. The bottles stopped flying, insults faded into scattered laughter, feet started tapping in the dust. Some voices even joined in cautiously at first, as if testing whether it was safe to enjoy this. Freddie fed on that hesitation. He moved closer to the edge of the stage, made eye contact, invited participation without asking for permission. What had started as mockery transformed into curiosity, and curiosity into momentum. Brian May later said that was the moment he realized they might survive the night. Not triumph, not victory. Survival. Because when a hostile crowd starts moving with you, even slightly, the battle is already shifting. By the time Queen moved through the final songs of their improvised set, the impossible had happened. 30,000 people who came to destroy them were no longer unified in anger. They were divided by rhythm. And Freddie Mercury had found the crack. As the final notes faded into the Australian night, something unthinkable followed. Applause. Not thunderous, not universal, but real. Freddie stood at the front of the stage and let it settle. He didn't rush. He didn't bow. He simply looked out at the crowd, the same crowd that had tried to humiliate him minutes earlier. Then he spoke. His voice was calm, measured, almost gentle. He thanked them for listening, acknowledged that Queen was unknown to most of them, admitted, without apology, that this night had been difficult. And then he said something that sounded ridiculous. He told 30,000 people that when Queen returned to Australia, they would be the biggest band in the world. The reaction was laughter. Not cruel, not hostile, disbelief. Who was this man making such a claim? A singer from a band that had nearly been booed off the stage? A group that had just abandoned their own music to survive? But Freddie wasn't joking. There was no arrogance in his voice, no challenge, just certainty. He wasn't trying to convince the crowd. He was stating a future he already believed in. And as Queen walked off the stage, that promise hung in the air, absurd, fragile, and unforgettable. Queen left Australia with no headlines declaring victory, no instant fame, no overnight success. But they carried something far more valuable. Proof. Proof that they could face the worst possible audience, 30,000 people actively trying to erase them, and bend that moment without breaking. Freddie never forgot Sunbury. He carried it into every performance that followed, into every risky decision, into every moment where he chose connection over ego, instinct over rigidity. Years later, when Queen returned to Australia as global superstars, Freddie asked a simple question on stage. Who had been there that night in 1974? A few hands went up. Freddie smiled. Not with bitterness, not with triumph, with affection, because Sunbury wasn't about revenge. It was about transformation. The lesson Freddie learned that night became a blueprint, not just for Queen, but for live performance itself. Hostility isn't an obstacle. It's raw energy waiting for direction. Most artists fight it. Freddie Mercury redirected it. 30,000 people gathered to watch an unknown band fail. Instead, they unknowingly witnessed the moment Queen learned how to take control of any crowd, anywhere in the world. They didn't realize it then. History did. Most people remember legends at their peak. Very few remember the nights when everything almost collapsed. Sunbury wasn't a victory lap. It wasn't heroic. It was ugly, hostile, humiliating, and brutally honest. 30,000 people didn't want Queen to succeed. They wanted proof that this band didn't belong on that stage. And for a moment, they were right. Queen was losing. Freddie Mercury was being swallowed by noise. The night was slipping away. What changed history wasn't a song. It wasn't talent. It wasn't volume. It was adaptability. Freddie understood something that night that would define his entire career. When the world turns against you, fighting harder isn't always the answer. Sometimes you survive by changing the rules mid-game. Sunbury taught Freddie how to read a crowd, how to feel resistance before it explodes, how to turn hostility into momentum. Years later, the world would watch him command Wembley with ease. They would call it confidence, charisma, magic. But that power was forged here in dust, heat, and rejection. 30,000 people came to watch Queen fail. Instead, they unknowingly witnessed the moment Freddie Mercury learned how to take control of any room, any crowd, any night. And from that moment on, there was no audience he couldn't face. If this story changed the way you see Freddie Mercury, subscribe to the channel because we tell the stories behind the legends, not just the highlights. Like this video if you believe the hardest moments shape the greatest artists. And comment below, what would you have done, standing alone in front of 30,000 people who wanted you gone? Let's talk.